The moment began without warning, slipping into Emily Parker's evening like a quiet crack in glass. Easy to miss, but impossible to forget once seen. And it happened while she stood beside her husband, Mark, in a softly lit community hall just outside Seattle, where neighbors gathered for a local fundraiser filled with gentle music, polite smiles, and small talk that floated through the room like harmless noise. And at first everything felt normal because Emily had worn a blue dress Mark once said he loved, and she felt calm, present, and settled into the comfort of a marriage that had lasted over a decade. But then she noticed Mark's attention drift. Not suddenly, not obviously, but slowly enough to feel real, as his eyes followed a woman walking past them, a woman Emily did not know, someone ordinary yet confident, laughing with another guest. And Mark's gaze stayed on her just a moment too long, long enough for Emily's chest to tighten and her breath to pause. And in that second, she felt something sharp and unfamiliar, not anger, not jealousy exactly, but awareness. The kind that wakes you up when you realize something important has changed. And Emily didn't react because years of marriage had taught her control and grace. So she smiled when someone spoke to her, nodded at the right times, and kept her posture relaxed even as her thoughts raced faster than the soft music playing in the background, telling herself it was nothing, that people notice others all the time. That attraction does not mean betrayal. Yet when she glanced back at Mark, she saw distance in his expression, not desire but distraction, as if his mind had stepped away from the room and from her. And that hurt more than the look itself, because Emily had felt that distance growing quietly over time, hidden under routines, shared bills, and polite conversations about work and weekend plans. And now it stood clearly between them like an unspoken truth. And as the night continued, she caught his attention wander again, brief but undeniable. And each time it felt like a small thread pulling loose from the fabric of their life together, and she wondered how long it had been happening, how many moments she had missed while trusting the comfort of familiarity. And when Mark finally turned back to her and asked if she wanted another drink, his voice sounded normal, caring even, which made everything more confusing because the man she loved was still there, yet somehow not fully with her. And when they left the event and walked to the car under the cool night air, Emily felt heavier than she had when the evening began. And the drive home was filled with light conversation that felt careful, almost practiced, as if both of them were avoiding something fragile resting between their words. And Emily watched the city lights blur past the window, remembering earlier years when silence between them felt peaceful instead of tense, when Mark used to reach for her hand without thinking, when his attention was easy and full, and she wondered when that ease had faded. And whether she had changed too, whether life had quietly shaped them into strangers sharing the same space. And when they arrived home, Mark kissed her cheek, gentle and familiar, and went inside to check emails while Emily lingered in the car for a moment longer, breathing deeply, letting the truth settle, realizing that what hurt most was not the presence of another woman, but the absence of something she once felt certain about. And as she stood alone in the quiet driveway, she understood that this moment mattered, that ignoring it would only allow the distance to grow. And though she did not yet know what she would do, she knew one thing clearly. The life she thought was steady had shifted, and the next choice she made would shape what came after, because sometimes love does not break loudly. It slips unnoticed until someone finally pays attention, and tonight Emily had paid attention. The days after the fundraiser moved quickly, but felt heavy, as if time itself had changed its rhythm. And Emily noticed it first in the quiet moments of their home, where everything looked the same yet felt different, because Mark still kissed her goodbye in the mornings, still asked about her work, still laughed at familiar jokes, but his attention drifted in ways that made her feel unseen. And she found herself watching him more closely, not with suspicion, but with a growing need to understand, wondering if he felt the same distance she did, or if it lived only inside her thoughts. And instead of speaking right away, she stayed silent, choosing to listen, to feel, to observe the small gaps between their words. And at night, when Mark fell asleep beside her, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the image of his wandering eyes, not to punish herself, but to face a truth she had avoided. That comfort had slowly replaced connection, and routine had taken the place of passion. And one evening, while Mark worked late, Emily stood alone in the kitchen, holding a photo from years earlier, one taken during a trip along the Oregon coast, where the wind had tangled her hair, and Mark had laughed freely, his arm wrapped around her as if letting go were impossible. And the memory filled her with warmth and grief at the same time, because that version of them felt far away. And she asked herself whether love faded on its own, or if people simply stopped feeding it. And as the silence of the house pressed in, she felt a choice forming inside her, one that surprised her because it was not driven by fear or anger, but by clarity. And instead of planning a confrontation or searching for proof of betrayal, she decided to look inward, to face the parts of herself she had neglected. The dreams postponed, the confidence softened by years of putting everyone else first. And the next morning, she signed up for an art class she had once talked about but never pursued, feeling a small spark of excitement that reminded her she was more than a wife waiting for attention. And she began waking earlier, walking through the neighborhood as the air cooled her thoughts, feeling stronger with each step. When Mark noticed the change, the new energy in her voice, the lightness in her smile, he asked if she was happy. And she answered honestly that she was trying to be. And that answer stayed with him, because he sensed something shifting too. And a few days later, Emily asked him to join her for a walk along the waterfront. No distractions, just the two of them. And when they stood by the water, watching the light reflect on the surface, Emily spoke gently, choosing truth without blame, telling him she missed feeling close, that she missed being seen, that she felt them drifting and it scared her. And Mark listened quietly, surprised by her calm and honesty. And after a long pause, he admitted he had felt lost in routine, distracted by work, unaware of how far they had drifted. And he told her the look she noticed meant nothing on its own, but the distance between them mattered more than he wanted to admit. And in that moment, something softened between them, not fixed, but open. And as they walked home side by side, Emily felt a cautious hope rise, knowing that love could still grow if both were willing to tend to it. And though nothing was certain, the silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt like a space waiting to be filled. After that long walk by the waterfront, Emily felt a shift inside her. Quiet determination to reclaim the part of herself she had set aside over the years. And instead of retreating or waiting for Mark to notice, she chose action, starting with herself, waking earlier each day to take long walks through the crisp morning air, feeling the rhythm of her own heartbeat and the pulse of the world around her, noticing the small details she had ignored for too long. The sound of birdsong, the pattern of leaves in the trees, the way sunlight danced on the pavement. And she enrolled in an art class she had dreamed of for years, picking up brushes and colors with a sense of freedom she hadn't felt since her 20s, meeting new people who shared her interests, laughing at small mistakes, and discovering a spark of confidence she thought was gone. And as she carried this new energy into her days, Mark began to notice the difference in her, the way her shoulders lifted. Her smile became lighter, her voice held warmth and certainty, and it stirred something in him that had been dormant under years of routine and habit, reminding him of the woman he had fallen in love with, the one full of life and curiosity. And Emily did not flaunt herself or seek attention. She simply embraced herself, letting her presence be strong and authentic, a quiet magnetism that drew him closer without force. And one evening she invited him for another walk, this time deliberately slow, winding through quiet streets and along the water where the lights reflected softly on the ripples. And she spoke honestly, her words gentle but clear, telling him how she had felt the distance growing between them, how she missed feeling seen, how she longed for connection. And instead of anger, she offered understanding, admitting her own part in letting routine take over, expressing her love while opening a door for change. And Mark listened, first quietly, then with a voice tinged with emotion, admitting he too had been caught in the rhythm of life, unaware of the small gaps forming between them. And he explained that the moment Emily noticed at the fundraiser had been fleeting, meaningless in itself, but it had made him realize how much he had taken their closeness for granted. And as they walked side by side, their hands brushing, they began to speak more openly about their desires, their fears, their dreams, the things they had stopped sharing over time. And with every word, the space between them softened, filled with honesty, and the beginning of trust rebuilt. And Emily noticed how Mark's eyes no longer wandered, but focused on her, on seeing her fully as if awakening to the person she had always been. And the realization made her heart beat faster, not with panic, but with hope that love could be renewed when both were willing to nurture it. And over the next few weeks, she continued to live fully in her own growth, pursuing hobbies, reconnecting with friends, caring for herself while keeping their home warm and welcoming. And Mark responded in kind, joining her in small adventures, showing attentiveness, planning little surprises, and speaking words that carried depth and sincerity. And gradually the tension and unspoken distance of past months began to fade, replaced by laughter, shared glances, and gentle touches that reminded them both of the intimacy they had built together over years. And Emily understood that the real surprise was not in changing Mark's attention, not in trying to control his feelings, but in how she had discovered her own strength, how she had chosen courage over fear, presence over resentment, and love over pride. And she felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that by embracing herself, she had unknowingly created space for him to return fully, without drama or pressure. And one night, as they sat together on the porch sipping tea, she saw Mark watch her with a look that was patient, tender, and awake, a look she hadn't seen in years. And she realized that this simple change, this choice to live fully as herself while still offering love, had begun to heal the cracks, had begun to remind them both why they had chosen each other in the first place. And though the future remained unwritten, Emily felt a calm certainty that they were on the right path, building connection from honesty, courage, and presence. And in that moment, as the moonlight reflected on the garden and the soft hum of the night surrounded them, she understood that the heart of love was not in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but in the small, consistent acts of choosing each other every day, seeing each other fully, and nurturing the bond quietly but deeply. And this revelation, simple yet profound, filled her with hope and anticipation for the next chapter, knowing that the choice to grow, to engage, and to love had already begun to transform their marriage. And as she rested her hand on Mark's, feeling him squeeze it gently in return, Emily smiled softly to herself, realizing that sometimes the most powerful surprises come not from others, but from discovering your own strength and inviting love back into your life through courage and presence. A few weeks after Emily had begun focusing on herself and reconnecting with Mark, the change in their relationship was noticeable, subtle yet powerful. And one Friday afternoon, she came home to find a note resting on the kitchen table in Mark's handwriting, simple and direct. "Pack a bag. Trust me. Trust me." And her heart raced with curiosity and a tinge of nervous excitement, because Mark rarely planned surprises, and this felt different, full of intention and care. And without asking questions, she obeyed, packing essentials and leaving the rest to the unknown, feeling a mix of anticipation and hope as they drove north toward a quiet lakeside town in Canada. The kind of place that seemed untouched by routine, where the air was crisp, the water still, and the world outside slowed down. And during the drive there was no need for small talk. They shared glances, a few smiles, a sense of presence that had been missing for months. And arriving at a small cabin tucked among pines, they were greeted by silence and space, the kind that allowed words and feelings to rise naturally. And that evening they walked along the lake shore, the moon reflecting on the calm water, and for hours they spoke, first cautiously, then with growing honesty, sharing thoughts and dreams they had once assumed were understood, rediscovering the rhythm of conversation that had been drowned out by life's routine. And they laughed at memories both silly and sweet, recalled moments from early in their relationship, and as the stars emerged overhead, Emily felt a warmth she had not realized she missed, a mix of relief, joy, and connection that filled the quiet spaces of her heart. And Mark reached for her hand, holding it gently, and the gesture carried more meaning than words could express, because it was an acknowledgement of presence, commitment, and attention. And through these small acts, the distance that had grown between them began to dissolve, replaced by a growing intimacy, tender and steady, built on honesty and choice. And over the next 2 days, they hiked along wooded paths, sat by campfires sharing stories in quiet silences, cooked meals together, and in every shared activity, they noticed the other not as an expectation, but as a gift, listening fully, speaking fully, loving fully. And Emily realized the surprise Mark had prepared was never about an elaborate trip or extravagant gesture, but about space, time, and depth, and focus on each other, about creating conditions where they could remember what had drawn them together. And in those moments, she understood something profound. She had saved their relationship not by competing, questioning, or fearing, but by embracing herself, by rediscovering her passions, her strength, and her joy. And in doing so, she had invited Mark to see her fully again, and he had responded not with guilt or excuses, but with presence, attention, and love. And as they sat one evening on the cabin porch, the lake reflecting the golden sunset, Mark turned to her with eyes clear and warm, a look that said everything words could not. And Emily felt the depth of connection that had once been buried under silence and routine, now blooming quietly but powerfully. And she smiled softly, understanding that this moment, these days together, were a turning point. Not just a pause from life, but a deliberate choice to reconnect, to prioritize love and to nurture it with care and attention. And she saw in Mark the man she had married, but also someone renewed, aware of the bond they shared and committed to protecting it. And in that clarity, Emily felt a sense of calm and joy she had longed for, a feeling that they were not just reclaiming what had been lost, but building something stronger, rooted in trust, honesty, and mutual presence. And as the stars began to scatter across the night sky, Mark held her hand tighter and Emily rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat matching hers. And in that quiet, simple connection, she realized the true surprise of the story was never about jealousy or fear, but about the power of choice, the courage to grow, and the beauty of rediscovering each other through patience, love, and attention. And she knew that whatever challenges came next, they had found a path back to each other, one paved with understanding, care, and the gentle certainty that love, when nurtured, could always return stronger than before.